a snare. Typically, we associate this contrivance with creatures: a rodent ensnared in a box, a canine caught in a leg-hold trap. However, it becomes apparent that a human can also be entrapped, and in such cases, they chance enduring the full terror of an inescapable predicament, and the result is invariably identical. 5 individuals aboard a compact vessel embarked on an arduous, perilous voyage along the South American shoreline. They would be confined to this snare for an extended period. The group included an American dad accompanied by his 2 adolescent boys and a married pair from Manchester, a physician and an attorney, both in their mid-20s. Initially, all seemed well, but only when they were together at sea did it become evident that one among them was an aspiring serial offender. Witnessing others gripped by sheer horror ignited a frenzied surge of energy and a perception of his own supremacy. Previously, he had been employed as an ambulance operator. When the crew was summoned to yet another incident, he would furtively photograph the mutilated human forms and add the images to his collection. He derived pleasure from observing individuals in agony. He yearned to hear their pleas for deliverance. It was his primary gratification in existence. When Chris ultimately returned home following a 10-month absence, his entire family dreaded leaving him even for a moment. They desired to commemorate this day as his new birth. It seemed like a miraculous occurrence. Such events only transpired in films. The young man reappeared after being absent for 10 months, and his loved ones truly struggled to trust their own joy. They organized a grand celebration to honor Chris's homecoming. He was alive and well, and that was the crucial aspect. Penny observed as her older sibling grinned at all the invitees. Subsequently, when everyone had departed, she resolved to visit his room and express how delighted she was that he had returned, how much she had longed for him. Gently opening the door, Penny noticed that he was already in slumber. The girl cautiously perched on the edge of the bed and drew back the blanket that entirely shrouded her brother's visage, and instantly her hand instinctively recoiled. In Chris's bed lay a wholly unfamiliar individual, and adjacent to him on the bedside table rested a rubber mask bearing her brother's countenance. Penny cried out and awoke. It was her typical nightmare ever since her brother vanished. It was uncertain which was more dreadful: the vivid nightmare or the brutal reality that Chris would never come back. Penny was resolute in ensuring that whoever had abducted her brother would face the consequences. The girl located these individuals on social media, tracked them down, and commenced writing anonymous messages from a fake account. She expressed rather ominous things, attempting to elicit a response, but they remained silent. Penny Farmer was unaware that while she was searching for them on the internet, they were searching for her in the real world. Off the coast of Belize in South America, there was a ship named Justin B. It was a wooden sailboat around 30 feet in length. Instead of a proper bedroom or bathroom, there was a tiny compartment about 3 feet wide, the sole sheltered area. Behind it was the galley, a confined kitchen where one could prepare something to eat. The cubby holes somehow accommodated 5 people to sleep at night. In lieu of a bathroom, they tossed a rope overboard and did their business, hoping there wouldn't be a shark nearby. The proprietor of Justin B was 36-year-old Silas Duane Boston from California, who possessed an eccentric personality. This boisterous man with a crazed laugh effortlessly befriended people wherever he went and regaled everyone with tales of his wild adventures. His piercing blue eyes seemed to penetrate deep into the soul. Generally, Silas was regarded as an exceptionally charismatic and charming individual. He was a genuine ladies' man. Women constantly flocked around him. Duane had been wed 7 times and had numerous children from 7 different women. Silas was never particularly courteous to women, but that's precisely what drew the opposite sex to him. Also aboard the boat were Duane's 2 sons, 13-year-old Vince and 12-year-old Russell, along with a couple from the United Kingdom, Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton. 25-year-old Chris worked as a physician, and 24-year-old Peta was an attorney. They had been together since they were 14 and epitomized true high school sweethearts. Before plunging headlong into their careers, the young couple resolved to see a bit of the world. They were acquainted with Silas through another British traveler. They were headed to Honduras, and the man proposed to take them there on his boat for $500. He also pledged to provide them with the chance to sail, swim, snorkel, and stop anywhere along the coast. Duane himself was traveling to Costa Rica to sell the boat, so the couple had the opportunity to make this final journey with him. The initial few weeks on the boat were fantastic. The teenagers, Vince and Russell, were delighted to have new people on board. Chris and Peta shared stories about their work and travel experiences with the boys. Everyone had a great time. Each evening they would snorkel and cook fish or lobster for dinner, or sometimes simply relish the warm turquoise water and sea air. Chris learned to sail and read his medical textbooks. Silas lounged in the sun and drank cheap rum, while Peta wrote lengthy letters home, which she sent whenever they docked to replenish supplies. The girl told her parents about Justin B., the owner, the two children, and shared her impressions of the trip. Peta thought this must be what paradise resembles. Initially, there were 2 additional people on this boat, but they went ashore, citing urgent business and feeling unwell. Later, many speculated if these 2 perceived something in Silas that Chris and Peta might not have discerned yet. Everything was proceeding smoothly until at some point, things began to take a strange turn. Something sinister was brewing on the boat. This was evident from the altered tone of Peta's letters. At a certain juncture, the messages became entirely different. Instead of delight, discontent started to surface. The girl wrote that she was beginning to grow weary of the company of strangers in such a confined space. She was particularly annoyed by the teenagers who behaved like silly children and constantly quarreled. But there was nowhere to escape from it. Silas behaved even worse, cursing them when things didn't go as they should. Peta concluded her letter by expressing her desire to get out of there as soon as possible and go to the USA to extend her vacation there, because nothing exceptional was happening on the boat. In reality, something would transpire on this boat that none of the passengers could have envisioned in their worst nightmares. Every day, Silas drank more and more. The children knew what it was like to be around an intoxicated father. You never knew what would come into his head. It was impossible to discern from Duane whether he was joking or being dead serious. This man kept everyone around him constantly on edge. For instance, he told his children that he first took a person's life when he was 8 years old. His favorite thing to do at that age was to hurl stones at passing trains. One day, Silas noticed a homeless man on the platform and threw a stone right at his head. The man dropped dead. It was so much fun. The thrill of that moment stayed with him for life. After that, he loved to fight and volunteered to go to Vietnam. He enjoyed shooting and seeing enemies fall to the ground after his shots. In fact, he didn't consider them real people. Silas also took numerous photos of mutilated corpses in Vietnam and bragged about them later. The teenagers had no idea if their father had taken these pictures, if he had really sent someone to the afterlife when he was 8, or if all his stories were actually nothing more than fiction. But one thing was certain: even just the sound of their father's breathing was enough to terrify the boys. They were both afraid of this man. And then one day, the sun was beating down so fiercely that all the passengers on the boat were just lying on the deck, sunbathing, unable to do anything. Silas got drunk again. He made his younger son, Russell, jump into the water and unclip the stuck anchor. The boy took a deep breath and dived into the water. But the deeper he went, the more frightened he became. In fact, the anchor was moving just fine. He just needed to get back on board and try to pull it out. Russell turned his back to everyone and started pulling the rope, but his father crept up behind him and started hitting him repeatedly. Chris and Peta, who had nothing to do with these people, yelled at him to stop beating his son. Chris eventually ran over to physically tear Silas away from his own child. Duane whirled around and muttered through clenched teeth not to dare tell him how to raise his own children, and continued to beat the boy. Then Chris grabbed him and dragged him away again. Silas was visibly losing his mind. He tried to hit Farmer, but he dodged. Then the drunken boat owner lost his footing and tumbled overboard. As he flew and tried to grab the railing with his hands, he made only a creaking sound. It was a rather awkward fall, but everyone on the boat laughed together. They weren't amused. It was just that the sound and Silas's ridiculous tumble diffused the oppressive atmosphere. However, Duane was in no mood for laughter. He looked around at everyone with an evil look that boded no good, and just began swimming around the boat like a shark waiting for prey. After he sobered up a bit and climbed back on board, the atmosphere on deck completely changed. Russell and Vince knew that their father would never forget his shameful fall. When Silas returned to the boat, he told Chris and Peta that he was going to drop them off so they could make their own way to Honduras. But that evening, they couldn't come to an agreement. The couple said they would only pay him half if he didn't deliver them to their destination. Duane was unhappy with this arrangement. At night in the dark, he went to his sons and said he was going to deal with Chris. The boys didn't take their father's words seriously, thinking he would sober up and stop being angry, but that didn't happen. The following day felt like a living nightmare, with everyone uncertain about what would transpire. No consensus had been reached regarding the sum of money the couple would pay, leaving everyone feeling trapped on the vessel. As they journeyed back to land, the atmosphere was so fraught with unease that a deafening silence enveloped them all. Russell gazed off into the horizon, attempting to mentally detach himself from the situation and escape to a distant place. Abruptly, he spotted his entirely sober dad clutching a substantial wooden club in his hands. Vince, the other son, simply observed as his father sneaked up behind Chris and started striking him on the head repeatedly. The man collapsed to the ground, shielding himself with his arms. He yelled at Silas to cease, but the assailant persisted with the beating. Blood splattered everywhere. Vince recalled hearing the horrifying sound of a skull fracturing. Everyone was profoundly traumatized and unsure of how to react. Chris was still attempting to reason with Duane, but he continued the assault until the club snapped in two. Vince and Russell were instructed to go below deck to the galley if they wished to avoid being shot. Chris tried to stand up, but his injuries were too severe, requiring immediate medical attention, causing his legs to give out. As soon as he regained some balance, Silas struck him with such intensity that the man was hurled across the entire boat. However, Duane didn't merely hit him in the chest. He had a knife in his grasp. The attack only ended because the knife shattered from the impact, and Silas himself was exhausted after such physical exertion. At that instant, he was hunched over, panting heavily. By this point, Chris was enduring unimaginable agony. He likely suffered a skull fracture, numerous bone fractures, a concussion, and possibly internal hemorrhaging. However, they were far from the shore, imprisoned on this doomed vessel with a deranged individual. Chris and Peta paid Duane $500 simply to pacify him, and then the wounded young man assisted in bandaging Silas, despite being in an even worse condition himself. But as a physician who took the Hippocratic Oath seriously, he couldn't refrain from providing medical assistance. Farmer always carried a bag with medical instruments and a first aid kit. The man tried his best to ensure that he and Peta could safely reach land without further provoking the boat owner's wrath. That evening, they all simply went to bed. Peta tended to Chris's injuries, and he attempted to assure her that everything would turn out fine. The next morning, they would dock, disembark from the boat, and this nightmare would end. Silas awoke the following day, as if nothing had transpired, behaving as though yesterday had never happened. The passengers tried to avert their gaze from him because this individual was acting like a beast. He was in command. Around midday, Duane announced that he would abandon the couple somewhere remote so he could sail away before they reached civilization, and reported his actions to the authorities. Chris and Peta nodded in agreement, attempting to persuade Silas that they wouldn't contact the police, but that didn't matter much to him. He commanded them to collect their belongings and place them on the deck, then stated that he would bind them to buy more time to sail away. In reality, Chris and Peta had no alternative but to comply. They had no weapons, no means to resist since Chris was gravely wounded. All they could do was try to de-escalate the situation. Russell remembered a shiver running down his spine because his father began stripping them naked. Peta simply continued to sob at that moment, and Chris was reassuring her that everything would be all right. But Chris was also powerless, restrained and exposed. Silas was skilled at tying knots, so there was no way to loosen the rope. He kept Chris in the galley near the rear of the boat and Peta below in the sleeping quarters. Duane spent some time alone with her, subjecting her to sexual intercourse, and when he finished, he asked Russell to watch over the girl. The teenager witnessed her weep, but was unable to intervene. Another evening passed. They could have already reached land, but Silas had different intentions. He was gathering unused engine components, doing so very quietly. Russell and Vince exchanged glances, wondering what their dad was up to. The couple had been bound, emotionally and physically abused for the previous 24 hours. Chris was already in poor condition, but Duane, without untying them, hauled them out onto the deck under the blistering sun, then tossed on some random garments and began tightening the ropes. He wasn't finished playing his twisted games. For the remainder of the day, Silas navigated the boat towards the shore and then turned back, mocking the couple. He wanted to degrade them and strip them of their ability to resist, while relishing the power he held over the situation. He possessed the authority, and only he determined who would survive and who would perish. But that wasn't sufficient for Duane. He placed black plastic bags with small holes over the heads of his passengers so that air could circulate. He explained that this way, they would be unable to see where he was docking. Russell and Vince were standing on the deck, and the situation was escalating. The teenagers had no means to assist the couple because then their father's fury would come crashing down on them. While Peta and Chris couldn't see anything, Silas loudly instructed his sons to loosen the knots, and with a gesture directed them towards the heavy parts with the ropes attached and winked. This man was not going to make life any easier for the young couple. He wanted his children to fasten the load. The teenagers complied, and then there was silence. Nothing could be heard except the lapping of waves and the howling of the wind. Finally, Duane stopped the boat and announced that the shore was very close. There was a shallow area beneath them, so the couple would safely reach land. The boys looked around in terror, surrounded by the vast ocean on all sides. Silas lifted Chris from the deck and hurled him into the water. The heavy equipment plunged in after him. Russell and Vince stood in utter disbelief. Peta, hearing the splash of water, began to cry out to Chris in panic to ensure he was all right, but he could no longer respond to her. Then Silas approached her, disregarding her screams, lifted her up and also tossed her overboard. The boys watched in horror as the girl disappeared beneath the surface. They said it appeared as if their father was simply throwing unwanted junk overboard. It was so cruel that the episode was forever etched in the memory of the two teenagers. They would never forget how Peta called out to Chris and then sank under the water, leaving only air bubbles on the surface. They stood in silence until the bubbles ceased and the water became completely still. Later, Duane explained to his sons that he was compelled to act in such a manner to save his own life, as his club and knife were broken, leaving him without weapons for defense. He said that if Chris had wanted to, he would have attacked first. The man's only regret was that he didn't record his massacre and didn't enjoy toying with them a little longer. He also warned the boys that they were witnesses to a crime, and witnesses need to be eliminated. So as a loving father, he would take their lives in a completely painless way. That night, he got drunk and said he would do it the next day, giving them an entire night to pray. Then he sat down and recounted all his past crimes. Duane confessed to at least 10 or more cases with fatal outcomes. He also revealed that their mother, who had vanished without a trace many years ago, didn't actually go anywhere. He had sent her to the afterlife, and maybe he would send her sons to join her. Ultimately, the teenagers survived, and before they got off the boat in Costa Rica, Silas would deal with another couple he had volunteered to give a ride to. For 10 months, Peta and Chris's families lived as if frozen in time. Everything around them moved and changed, but they were stuck in a sort of suspended state, not knowing whether their loved ones were alive or had already departed this world. Both Peta and Chris were classified as missing persons, terrible words that make your blood run cold and cause any parent to shudder. The bodies of the young couple were actually discovered off the coast of Guatemala a long time ago. They were simply buried without notifying the families. Nigel, Chris's older brother, felt from the very beginning that he was no longer alive. He had an incident that transcended reality around the time the couple disappeared. Nigel was driving to work, in a great hurry for a meeting with all his thoughts absorbed by the road, when suddenly he heard his brother's voice in his head saying that death is not such a big problem. The voice sounded as if someone was whispering in his ear from the passenger seat. The shock of it was like being plunged into an icy pool on a hot summer noon. It was so realistic that he had to pull over to the side of the road to compose himself. Until that moment, Nigel did not believe in the existence of such phenomena and had never experienced anything like it. He didn't tell his family anything, worried that it seemed to him and he could deprive his loved ones of their last hope. But he shared with his wife, and later learned that the day of the meeting coincided with the approximate date of Chris's death. Penny, Chris's younger sister, discovered that her brother had died when she was returning home from school. At that time, she was a high school student, and she called her mother to ask permission to have dinner with friends. But her mother asked her in a stern voice to come home immediately. Penny understood everything. The girl was walking in the middle of winter, but she felt stuffy. Everything around looked like some kind of blurry spot, and only now it dawned on her that her brother would never walk through that door again. It was like an explosion, complete devastation. Penny's mom always tried not to cry in front of the other kids. For 10 months, she held back her emotions, but this time tears flowed from her eyes and she couldn't stop them. The only consolation was that Chris and Peta were buried next to each other. They had spent most of their short lives together. They were 24 and 25 years old when they were found dead. They lived across the street from each other and had a lot in common. Nothing in the world could separate them, even death they met together. Back in high school, Chris wanted to become a doctor. He graduated a year before Peta and was accepted into the Cambridge University preparatory program, but he refused because he promised his girlfriend that they would go to the same college together. After they finished their studies and realized their ambitions, the young professionals wanted to fulfill another promise they made to each other a long time ago, to see the world together. The couple planned to go to Australia, Fiji, Hawaii, and then to Los Angeles. From there, by car to San Diego, to Mexico, and finally to South America. They didn't like tourist routes. They wanted to immerse themselves in the culture on their own, meet new people. Peta loved writing letters. In her 10-page messages, she told her family about the adventures they encountered during their trip, and these letters played a crucial role in the investigation. When Peta's parents stopped receiving news from her, they raised the alarm. The couple's relatives turned to law enforcement and the embassy. Silas was questioned about the missing tourists, but he stated with complete confidence that he had dropped them off on the shore. However, the family did not believe him, since the last letters arrived when the couple was traveling on his boat to Honduras. By that time, Duane had changed the name of the boat and sold it, flown to Miami, gave away a car, and then drove all the way to California, where he was from. The Farmer family collaborated with numerous law enforcement agencies, but they had the impression that Silas was eluding them every time. Years passed, but the alleged perpetrator never faced justice. Then, Penny decided to take matters into her own hands. She reviewed all the files and documents, every letter that Peta had sent to her parents. The girl discovered the names of Duane's sons and started searching for them through social media, believing that they were most likely in Sacramento, California. Day after day, she scoured the internet for Silas's eldest son, Vincent Boston, and her determination paid off. When Penny found the pages of Duane's children, she began sending anonymous messages to Vince and Russell. They stated that she was aware of Chris's fate and was not going to let it go, but the messages went unanswered. Penny sat at the computer feeling despair, and then finally Russell, the younger son of Silas, inquired about her identity and what she wanted to discuss. Penny contacted the Sacramento Police Department, and they summoned Russell and Vince Boston for questioning. To their astonishment, the guys revealed everything. It turned out that their old man was not only cruel but also superstitious. After the couple sank into the waters of the ocean, Chris's music speaker, which he almost never parted with, remained on board. Among all of Chris's music, Duane disliked the Pink Floyd song Dogs the most, which had the following lyrics: "You're just a poor old man, all alone, dying of cancer, and when you lose control, you'll reap the harvest you have sown, and as the fear grows, the bad blood slows and turns to stone." A few days after the death of Chris and Peta, a huge wave crashed onto the boat and washed the music speaker overboard. It instantly vanished beneath the surface. Silas flew into a rage, shouting that it was Chris returning from the grave for his belonging. After that, he could not calm down for a long time and looked around in horror, apparently afraid that the hand of the deceased could reach him. Ultimately, Silas and his two sons returned to the USA and their life resumed its usual course. The man believed he had committed the perfect crime until one day the police knocked on his door. Silas Duane Boston was taken into custody. By that time, he had gray hair and a white beard, appearing haggard. He was 75 years old, as 39 years had elapsed since the demise of Chris and Peta. Throughout this lengthy period, Penny Farmer and her family had been pursuing this individual. It emerged that Silas's two sons, Vince and Russell, had also repeatedly approached the local Sacramento police, Interpol, and even the FBI over the 40 years of their lives. They recounted in meticulous detail what their father had perpetrated on the boat, but no one heeded their accounts. Law enforcement agencies failed to connect these two cases. They kept informing Penny and her family that they lacked sufficient evidence to rely on. There were also complications because the crime was committed in a different jurisdiction. When the Farmer family and Silas's sons united forces 39 years later, the investigation took a new direction. The relatives requested that the police reopen the case. A retired detective had kept copies of the original investigation in a garden shed at his home, and later provided them to the FBI. It also came to light that many people had perished around Duane in recent years, and he somehow always managed to evade capture. In the Boston family, all relatives were aware that Silas had done something to one of his wives, Mary Lou, the mother of Vince and Russell. The woman had mysteriously vanished 10 years before Chris and Peta boarded the ill-fated boat. Vince and Russell were toddlers when Mary Lou wanted to divorce her husband, but he decided to handle things differently. He took her to a remote area of Sacramento under some pretext and shot her. He described in great detail to friends and family how her legs twitched like a shot deer. Everyone knew about this case, but no one could substantiate anything. Unfortunately, much had changed over the years. Chris's father, who played a pivotal role in the fight for justice, had passed away. Peta's parents had also left this world, and they would never see Silas in prison. Chris's mother was still alive at 90 years old. But the elderly woman was determined to fly to America for the trial to look into the eyes of the one who took her son's life. However, she would never have that opportunity. When Silas was arrested, he refused to take the medications necessary for his survival and also refused to eat. His kidneys and liver immediately began to fail, and he essentially started to rot from the inside. The day before his death, his son Russell visited the prison, but not to support him. He wanted to find out from his father where his mother's body was. Duane refused to answer, just staring at him in silence, and the next day, Silas Duane Boston passed away. For Penny and her loved ones, this turned out to be devastating news. Years of searching for truth and justice ended in nothing. The man who was supposed to answer for his atrocities no longer existed. He never bore the punishment for his sins. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.